It's a wonderful day here at SSAI as we commemorate the United States Air Force on its 78th birthday. As part of our commemoration, we are joined by Assistant Chief Strategy Officer of SSAI, Keith Duffy, and SAMDA Deputy Program Manager at SSAI, Jeff Shull. I am Dawn Alexander, Marketing and Communications Director of SSAI, and we wanted to take a few minutes to share with Jeff and with Keith their honoring the Air Force. So now let's get started. Can you share a bit about your background, Keith and Jeff? What was your path into service, and what did you take away from it?
I guess I can start with that one. Yeah, so I joined the Air Force in the late 80s. I was not from a military family. My father had served in the Air Force in the Korean War and then gone on to get his, GI Bill. But we weren't really a military family, so it wasn't something that I was really considering as I was in, high school. But I was at the tail end of 4 kids, and my parents didn't have a whole lot of money to send me to college, and I really wanted to go be an electrical engineer. So when the Air Force recruiter came to our high school, I listened to what he had to say. And at the time, I was not offered a scholarship, but I decided I would join ROTC just to see what it was like and see if that was a career I was interested in. And other than having to get the pretty aggressive haircut, I had some pretty good Tom Petty hair going back then. I was immediately drawn to the other cadets and their sense of, purposefulness, sense of mission, the camaraderie. And I really enjoyed it. And it was an organization I wanted to be a part of. And I fell in love with it and decided, yeah, Air Force is a career for me. So I ended up getting commissioned, and I had changed my major to physics, but the Air Force did not have a lot of need for physicists in the Air Force, at least not in uniform. So they sent me to meteorology school at Florida State to get meteorology training. And, that was honestly, it was a happy coincidence or serendipity, whatever you want to call it. But it was fantastic. I loved it. It was not something I had considered, but I loved the application of the physics. The sky was your laboratory. There was lots of data to work with and analysis. And you got to see, the physics concepts I learned in school just play out, every day. And I just thought it was really interesting. And then on the Air Force side, the challenge of forecasting the weather every day, being a part of a mission and having your daily work really matter and help determine the successful outcome of a mission, was just very invigorating. It was very, very energizing. And I really enjoyed that. And I got to be part of, even as a junior officer, a bunch of, operations and do a lot of things and meet people that I never thought I would have the opportunity to do as a meteorologist. There was Operation Just Cause, Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Southern Watch, Kosovo, all those types of things, even, helping to search for bin Laden, things that I would never have thought I would do as a meteorologist. And it was a lot of fun. It was really interesting. And, then later on, you get to work as, at the highest levels of government, working in the Pentagon, working with other countries like NATO organizations and other government agencies, and really understand how our nation's, national security apparatus works and the whole of government approach. That was really fascinating, and it was wonderful to be a part of.
Jeff, how about you? That's really exciting, Keith, to hear.
Yeah, so Keith, I think you said your dad was in the Korean War. I think the previous military service in my family was the Civil War. So
wow.
I really didn't come from we won't talk about who was on what side there. But so I really wasn't a military family, wasn't tracked that way by anybody. I guess if you start talking about my path to service, it probably would just go back to several influences I had along the way, starting when I was a little kid. For starters, I was born in Ohio. Ohio is the birthplace of people like John Glenn and Neil Armstrong and Jim Lovell and Orville and Wilbur Wright. So I think there's something going on there. But really, my formative years, that would be as a kid growing up in the 1970s in Huntsville. So Huntsville, Alabama. We had moved there with my dad's work. And many of our friends and neighbors in Huntsville worked at Redstone Arsenal or the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. We were regular visitors to the Alabama Space and Rocket Center. So I think all that, just as a kid, kind of helped put me on a trajectory that got me involved in aviation and aerospace in some way. One story I remember in particular, it was the late 70s, probably 77, 78, along in there, when the Space Shuttle Enterprise flew to Huntsville for vibration testing. So non-destructive analysis and things like that out at Marshall. And they put the orbiter on the back of this giant NASA 747. So here's this huge airplane carrying the spaceship piggyback on top of it, and they literally flew right over my house. So I was out in my front yard with my mom and dad's Super 8 movie camera trying to get a video of this thing. And, I'd seen the Apollo launches on TV, but, now the space shuttle was literally flying right over my house, and I saw it with my own eyes. So that definitely, I have to think, was influential. Pretty cool stuff as a kid to see that. And it helped fuel curiosity and probably steer me on that path. So not too long after that, we moved back to my hometown in Ohio, and that's where I went to high school and went to college, studied aviation and aeronautical engineering. By that time, I decided I wanted to go into the Air Force as a career. I wanted to fly jets or do what I could to be a part of that aviation aspect, in addition to classes in like calculus and physics and engineering graphics and climbing around in wind tunnels. I also enrolled in Air Force ROTC. So just like Keith, that was my path to getting commissioned. So that's the Reserve Officer Training Corps. It's basically like taking another class while you're in college. And then the day I graduated with my engineering degree, I was also commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. To this day, I'm really glad I did. I can't imagine how different my life may have been if I hadn't. But like Keith was saying, things like teamwork, that camaraderie, doing work you really care about, being part of something that's bigger than yourself, building those relationships, working together with great people. These are all things that were part of my life throughout my 21-year Air Force career, and they're still important to me all these years later.
Thank you all for really kicking this off and showcasing, how strong the Air Force is as part of your background. You've served in the Air Force and now contribute to a science, technology, and engineering focused company, SSAI, supporting both DoD and civilian projects. How has your Air Force experience shaped the way you approach building meaningful relationships while supporting customer and partner needs in such a technically complex environment? Keith, please share with us.
Right. That's a great question because, most people think of, when they think of military service in the organizational culture, they think that, they perceive it as, quite doctrinally focused, very procedural, and where authority is, comes from your rank in the position that you hold. And, and some of that's fair, right? I mean, we had that culture for a reason. People are constantly moving into new positions. You're moving every 2 to 3 years, and you have to be able to react quickly, and the consequences can be severe if you're not successful. So, that's there for a reason. But at the same time, really, in any organization, developing, being able to quickly develop trustful relationships and deep relationships is extremely important to success. And, the military is no different. Both Jeff and I were frequently put in situations where you were brought together with a team of people from all over the country or all over the world, and you put into very complex and stressful situations, and you have to be able to quickly get to know those people, learn what makes them tick, understand their background and their equities. And sometimes it was people from other countries or other agencies within, the U.S. government. And you have to be able to quickly build those relationships and listen and learn from them if you're going to be successful at, achieving your mission. And, history's full of examples like that. Think of Dwight Eisenhower and how he had to manage the equities of, the British military and their political situation, the French, the Canadians, the Poles, everybody. And so we learn a lot we're constantly learning professional development and learning how to build relationships through, 25 years of service and having to move or change assignments 12, 13, 14 times. So it's, it was important to be able to bring that relationship building, to SSAI and to NASA. And, we both had takeaways from that. You have to learn how to listen before you speak. You have to learn how to, really get a deep understanding of not only are just, what the requirements of a contract are, but what does your client really need? What are their real pain points and sticking points? And then what's your own team need? What do they need to be successful, and what do they have to offer? So bringing that to the equation. Plus, I'd say the one other thing is a sense of urgency. When you move 12, 13 times in 25 years and you're in a leadership position, you only have a really brief period of time to make a difference and leave your mark and accomplish what you think the organization needs to accomplish. So you got to hit the ground running, and you have to have a sense of urgency, and you have to be very organized.
Thanks for those insights, Keith. And now, Jeff, turning to you, who you've also served in the U.S. Air Force and now play a critical role at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, supporting high-end computing and developing software systems to advance Earth science research. How has your Air Force experience influenced your approach to leading complex technical projects, fostering best practices in scientific software development, and driving innovation at the intersection of geophysics, geodynamics, and space science?
Don, I think there are definite parallels between the work we did supporting the Air Force and then work we're doing to support our government customers like NOAA and NASA over the years. Big part of it, and Keith touched on it as well, is bringing people together with diverse sets of skills, clearly stating an objective, and then working together with those people to achieve that goal. Specifically in the Air Force, you have things like tech data and Air Force instructions and regulations that you follow. In our work, we follow software engineering best practices. We do regression testing for several of NASA's models. We follow configuration management plans, continuously update documentation with new version releases. And in the 90s, back in the Air Force was kind of into this big quality movement back at the time. So they gave us several aspects of quality training. They sent us to the Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Successful People class. There's a big emphasis on continuous improvement. No matter how good you are now, let's study our processes. Let's see what we can do to get better. And I think in our current work on the SAMDA contract, and again, SAMDA is the support for atmospheres modeling and data assimilation contract, where we're in the 9th year of our 5-year contract. We're working on the models, how to make them more computationally efficient. It's really just all about how can we make it better. In our support to GMAO, for example, we'll run the current forward processing model. At the same time, we're running a candidate version of the model to see which one might be running better. So for example, if we determine, hey, there's a temperature bias or some other area where the current model could do better, let's try to fix that, then test that new version against the current version and see if we get it fixed or not. So it's that same goal, I think, of continuous improvement that you can see in both areas.
Thank you, Jeff. For our final question today, please share, as we celebrate the Air Force's 78th birthday, what does this milestone mean to both of you, personally and professionally? Keith, why don't you kick this off?
All right, yeah, sure. Honestly, when I first saw this question, my immediate reaction was one of shock and horror, because I realized that the Air Force is only 20 years older than me. Not even that much. So that was a little bit unnerving. But yeah, we were always, the Air Force, we'd always, at least until Space Force came about a couple of years ago, we considered to be, the junior service and so forth. But, in reality, aviation in the military has been around longer than that. Meteorology, even before that, I think the first meteorologists in the military were in the Army Signal Corps back in the 1870s. So we have that sort of pride and tradition. And then, of course, I think it was maybe 1909 or 1910 when the Army bought the first military aircraft from the Wright brothers. So we've been around a little longer than, the 78 years. But on the other hand, we were both proud that, well, I speak for myself, but I'm sure Jeff is too. We're proud of our own service, and that we separated in 1947 to develop our own culture, our own systems, our own way of fighting and helping the nation achieve its national security objectives. lot of that pride is, not only wrapped up in the tradition and the sense of family and everything that we have and our successes, but also being that part of that service that's more innovative. That military, aviation, and now space has always been a huge space for innovation. Somebody the other day sent me a photo, a caption, and it had two black and white photos, and one was the Wright brothers standing in front of their first successful flight aircraft, and the other one was Neil Armstrong standing in front of the landing module, and the caption said, "It's hard to believe that these only happened 66 years apart." So it's incredible that we, got off the ground with powered flight and went to space and landed on the moon in just 66 years. And what we're involved in, and what we continue to do now is not just about the innovation of weapon systems or space flight or terrestrial flight, but it's about how can we get information to the warfighter or to decision makers more quickly than our adversary? Can we have better information? Can we get it to them quicker into ways that would allow us to stay one step ahead of our adversary and constantly have them reacting to our actions instead of vice versa? And so I know we've, both have been proud to be a part of that and tried to bring that sort of culture to SSAI. And, NASA shared many of those values too, right? And that was one of the reasons it was so attractive to come and work for SSAI and NASA, which is not just to have that tradition of success and breaking boundaries, but also being part of a really innovative organization. So, that's what I think of, I guess, on our 78th anniversary.
Thank you, Keith. Jeff?
Yeah, I agree, Keith. It is amazing that it has been 78 years. And I think all along the Air Force has really been pushing the envelope and testing technology, advancing science throughout that time. You went from propellers to jet engines to commercial air travel becoming prevalent across the country and around the world. And we started launching satellites into orbit. We put humans into orbit. And we put humans on the moon, and we brought them home again. Just incredible to think about that in that 66 years. We're going to go back to the moon. I'm sure the Air Force and NASA and commercial industry will all be involved in developing those technologies and really moving the species forward.
Thank you, Jeff. And I really would like to thank both of you for your service.
Certainly thank all of our employees at SSAI who have served in the Air Force, and all of you listeners to whom may have served. Thank you again for your service, and really appreciate the insights that you have provided today, Keith and Jeff, regarding the Air Force, as well as how you continue to serve through SSAI today. And for anyone who may have more interest in furthering their knowledge on what SSAI does, please don't hesitate. We have information below that can share more with you, so you can reach out to us. And we also hope that you will look at other podcasts that we have created regarding a variety of topics that involve science, engineering, and technology. Have a great day, all. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks. Nice seeing you, Don.
Thank you.